Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining me today. We're in one of my favorite spaces of the home, the living room, and I love this space because when I have guests staying with me, typically every day starts here, and it usually starts with a cup of coffee, which is the theme of today's episode. So today we're going to be talking about several things centered around coffee, including setting up your at-home coffee bar. But more importantly, we're going to be talking about some hosting etiquette related to coffee that can really help in making your guests feel welcome. So before we get to coffee, most of you know my home base is here in El Paso, Texas, but I am originally from Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is about 50 miles north up I-10. Big shout out to all my New Mexico friends. Grew up there, and I come from a long lineage of farmers and ranchers in New Mexico. And one of my favorite coffee memories is, as a child, we would go up to Las Vegas, New Mexico, which is north central New Mexico. We had friends that had a huge ranch up there, and we would go up and help them drive cattle. And on these cattle drives, of course, we would overnight on the ranch, and I will never forget, in the mornings, we would have what my grandfather called Cowboy Coffee. And Cowboy Coffee was basically a tin can or cauldron on an open fire that they would bring water to a boil in and just throw the coffee grounds into it, let it boil for a few minutes, and then just scoop it up and serve it. And I'll always remember when you were drinking the Cowboy Coffee, the trick was to let the grounds settle in the cup so you could drink the coffee, and then knowing when to quit before you got down to the mud that was in the bottom of your cup. That's one of my fondest memories of coffee. We all love sharing stories over a cup of coffee, so let's talk about how we can make memories with your at-home coffee bar. When I was designing my coffee bar, the primary consideration for me was guest experience, creating something that's going to give people a sense of who I am in my home, but also make them feel very welcome. So obviously, the coffee components are really important, but there's also non-coffee and coffee-related elements that can make the experience even better. So one of the first things I'd like to talk about, as you saw in the introduction, anybody that visits me, part of the experience here are my 3 Chihuahuas. I am a dog dad, so I was really happy to find the artwork that's behind my coffee bar by a local artist, Kelsey Kilcrease, so shout out to Kelsey. 3 Chihuahuas, which I thought was appropriate. And I like to mention that because when you're creating this space for your coffee bar, you might want to think about incorporating artwork or elements that might be local or regional or special to you. Another thing that I love to have in my coffee bar is the Talavera pieces. These are vintage Talavera pieces. This is the creamer. Every morning when I have guests, the milk goes into here. This is what we serve it out of. And in addition to those, I also have these really great vintage Talavera mugs. I don't use these every day myself, but I love having them on the coffee bar because they're so exemplary of my aesthetic and kind of the feel I like to give my guests, again, in making them feel welcome. So we have those. The next thing is fresh flowers. As you know with me, flowers and candles 24/7. Maybe candles aren't 24, but I love to have flowers around. So that's a special touch that I like to have. And then finally, I like to create this kind of pastry setup for my guests. Oftentimes guests will have plans to maybe go out to breakfast, or perhaps we're having a breakfast here in the home. But even so, you've got that first cup of coffee and you just want that little nibble to go along with it. So I love to have these. And also, you've already heard me say how much I love El Paso. Mexican pastries are one of my favorite cultural things about this area. And with that, there's something that maybe people might not have as much access to, or certainly probably not something they would have every day. So I love offering that. It's special for me to offer it to them, and it's special for them to enjoy it. So let me start by talking about the Keurig. I like having the Keurig really for guest convenience. I had a good friend staying with me, my friend Paula, who's a costume designer. Hey, Paula. She was actually here working on a Hollywood film, which was super exciting, but she was out the door every morning at 5 a.m. So for Paula, the Keurig was perfect. She could get up, make her coffee, have that first cup, and and even do a cup to go to take with her. I also have to-go cups as part of the setup, which I love. But the nice thing about the Keurig is it's easy, it gives us a variety, and it makes it just very convenient if guests don't have the time to go through like the whole process of making like a French press or an espresso. Because I have limited drawer space, I found this great 2-drawer stand for my Keurig, and this is where I keep the K-cups. So on the bottom, I have all of the cups for the Keurig. So I've got a standard dark roast, I've got a hot chocolate, and I've got the flavors. And then in the top drawer, I have all of the sugars and sweeteners and the spoons for the coffee. So I've got sugar in the raw, I've got monk fruit, and I've got Splenda. So between those three, we've got all the sweetening bases covered. So my at-home choice for myself and what I like to do for my guests when we have the time is I love to do a French press. So I use the Sakura pot, I love it. I picked this pot for the color, no surprise, and I love this line because they have a variety of colors. But this is also great for me because of the size, and also it's excellent at keeping the coffee warm all morning. So I can do an entire pot of French press, and this will get me through the majority of my morning. We're gonna talk about coffee beans and the ground of coffee beans for both French press and espresso in just a bit. So as I mentioned, my go-to coffee at home is in the French press, but occasionally somebody wants a kick, including myself, of espresso. So for that, I like to use a stovetop espresso maker. So here's my little treasure. This is my Bioletti, styled by Dolce & Gabbana stovetop espresso maker. So side note, the big Dolce & Gabbana exhibition is at the Grand Palais in Paris through the end of this month. So if anybody's gonna be there, send me a private message. Maybe we can meet up and have a cup of coffee. But anyway, we're gonna get to the beans that are best for using an espresso. But I love, there's something about the tradition of the stovetop that I love. And also, I have these great little espresso cups that I got on Etsy, and I love using Etsy as a resource for finding very specific, unique things. So we've talked about the Keurig, we've talked about the French press, we've talked about the espresso maker. I want to mention one more thing. This little gadget right here is a milk frother, and I was introduced to this by a friend who will remain nameless about 2 years ago, and my life was perfectly good before I knew this existed, and now I can't live without it. But it's a nice add-on to have for guests, and this is also one of the things that I use regularly on the coffee bar. So another little add-on I like to have for guests are the flavored syrups that they can use in their coffees. I use the classic Torani brand, tried and true. We love it, but I love having these dispensers. There's a lot of different variations on these types of dispensers that you can get. The ones that I have are Moly Moly. I love them, first of all, because for me and my space, they're tall and slender, so they fit on the shelf. But also, Moly Moly provides like 20 to 25 labels of like the best or most popular flavors in the syrups. So I love being able to have these labels on. I think they look nice and crisp. And the convenience of these is so nice. People can just go do the pump and they've got their flavor. And I also love having cinnamon and nutmeg. Those are two of my favorite add-ons. I love nutmeg in a really dark coffee. It's one of my favorite things. But this is kind of how I round out the flavoring for my guests. All right, so let's talk about coffee beans. One of my favorite beans is from 787 Coffee, and I've got to do a shout out. Ivan Pena, CEO of 787 Coffee, is from El Paso, Texas. These coffees are grown in Puerto Rico, single sourced, and they now have 6 coffee shops in Puerto Rico, 17 coffee shops in New York City. So if anybody's there is in the New York area, be sure and check out 787 Coffee. And we're about to have our 4th location open here in El Paso. So Ivan is one of the most positive and inspiring people that I know of, and it makes me happy to give him a shout out. This is the Supremo blend. It's a dark roast, and it has notes of dark chocolate, butter, and pink grapefruit. Now, let's talk about the grind. So we're using the 787 Supremo bean in 2 different grounds. We have a coarse ground and we have an extra fine ground. The coarse is for the French press and the fine is for the espresso. So when we look at these, the way you can tell if you've got it right, the coarse ground should look like a coarse salt. So you can see the texture of that. And then the fine ground should really have the texture of like a flour or a powdered sugar. So that's how you know you've got the right ground for those coffees. So why is this important? The coarse ground is important because when it's in the chamber of the French press, we get enough flavor extraction for the flavor, but not too much extraction for the bitterness. And also, when we press that filter down through the French press, the coarse ground won't go through the filter. So that's why it's important for that. The espresso ground, the fine espresso ground, is for that intensive flavor extraction that really characterizes the flavors we expect in espresso. So we've shared a lot of ideas today about setting up your home coffee bar. Really, what I'd like to say is there's no right or wrong answer on how to do it. Think about how you're going to use it. If you're someone like myself who has guests quite often, I really set mine up to be more accommodating to the guest. My daily coffee needs are very habitual. I kind of do the same thing all the time, so I don't have a lot of needs. But if you don't entertain much or have guests often, set yours up to serve yourself so it works for you. So thank you so much for the birthday wishes from last week's episode. I really appreciate that. Our manifesto moment for today is one of my favorites. And remember, coffee is the 8th wonder of the world. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And please join us next week when we go from coffee bar to cocktail bar, and we're going to give you some tips and ideas on setting up your home bar, including liquor selection, barware, and glassware. Thanks again for being with us today.
You like you do.